Okay, so again, my name is Michael Terpin. I've been in the space 6 years. Got in 2013. I know there's some folks on the boat that have been in even longer. The fortunate few who found out about it in 2011, 2012, and held on to their dollar bitcoins. Congratulations. But 20 years from now, people are still going to be looking back at these as the early days. So I'm going to be talking about some of the things other than Bitcoin, and then I'll be on a panel later with Tone, and we'll probably get into a little scuffle over that because, as you know, he believes Bitcoin is the one and only savior of the world and everything else is crap. That isn't how the market sees it. And if you look at the coin market cap overall, right now we're at about a little over 50% Bitcoin dominance, meaning the value of all cryptocurrency being Bitcoin. The rest are what are called altcoins, and they've come into existence through a number of different methods. ICOs, initial coin offerings. My company, Transform Group, we have a PR division that's worked with over 100 ICOs, 115 I believe it is, including the very first one, Mastercoin. We also launched Ethereum, MaidSafe, Neo, Qtum, Lisk, and a number of other ones. And so definitely have seen how the evolution has come in. IEOs, which are exchange offerings, we're going to get into that as sort of one of the latest things. There's been a lot of confusion about how these come in to the world, what kind of value they bring, and so I'm just going to spend a few minutes going over it, and then we'll have a panel. And again, I'm CEO of Transform Group. I also started BitAngels, which is the oldest, largest gathering of angel investors. And we're now also moving across. It's been primarily online. We still have the tape of Vitalik pitching Ethereum back in February of 2014 to a group of people who were trying to decide whether it was worth 30 cents. And we're coming to a city near you. We're in about a dozen cities right now, having monthly meetings, New York, LA. London starts next month, Berlin, Hong Kong, Singapore, Austin, Texas. So bitangels.io. Check it out if you're either a starter. There's no pitch if you get selected to go in front of investors. And investors, you can join a membership or you can just pay for breakfast. So, and then CoinAgenda is also a conference that I do a couple times a year, including in Europe. Okay, Satoshi. This all goes back to Satoshi. It annoys me when I hear different industry pundits, particularly who have only been in the industry for a year or two, say, well, I don't really believe in Bitcoin, but I like that blockchain thing. There is no blockchain without Bitcoin. Repeat after me, there is no blockchain without Bitcoin. It came from the white paper. Satoshi, whether he, she, or they, whoever they are, it doesn't really matter right now. Anybody know whether Linus Torvalds is alive or dead? Anybody? He's alive. He started Linux when he was 19. It basically means Linus's Unix. And if he got hit by a train tomorrow, it wouldn't matter. Linux would go on. And so it doesn't matter whether Satoshi's alive or dead, other than if he moves his coins. It might make a little bit of difference in the price. But otherwise, there's a whole group of developers that are innovating on Bitcoin. Obviously, last year, I understand there was a little bit of a scuffle over Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, and now we got Bitcoin SV. But it's like most technology startup ecosystems, it's something that keeps evolving. And you know, when I got in, there was barely 300,000 people in the sector, and now there's 30 to 50 million, depending on whose estimates you believe. I believe by the time that we have the next halving next year, we'll probably be closer to 100 million. And by the time that we sort of hit the historic all-time highs, which are usually end of the year after the halving, you will probably be in the couple 100 million range. What's really keeping us from getting to 1 billion users is better interface, better distribution, and better legal clarity. And we'll get into a few of these. Central banks. Central banks, you know, many people think they're part of the government. They're not. They're controlled by very powerful banking families going back hundreds of years. And, you know, a lot of the population doesn't realize that the US, the EU, you know, you don't own your money. You basically borrow it from powerful banks. And that's what allows them to run up these outrageous deficits that has really made hard assets like gold, silver, arable farmland, real estate, the things that are going to survive when the bubble pops. And the bubble I'm talking about is the fiat bubble. For most of the last 6,000 years, money, which evolved from barter, was backed by gold and silver. It isn't anymore. Now it's just backed by the full faith and credit in whatever government is your government. And how much is that worth? Right now, it's basically in Japan worth 3 times the value of everything that's made. And so the interest that they're paying, even on these low interest rates, makes up a big chunk of the entire government's spending. If interest rates go up globally, all of a sudden some of these governments that are leveraged 3, 4, 5 times are going to pop, and all that debt's going to go exploding, and you're going to have a 2008, 2009 credit crisis on steroids. And that's when we think something like Bitcoin, hard money, is going to shine. So Bitcoin, again, was the first cryptocurrency, and its main use was peer-to-peer payments. First time that you could go and send something of value from person A, sitting anywhere in the world, to person B, sitting anywhere in the world, without a government or a bank approving it. That was revolutionary. It still is revolutionary. There have been other folks to be able to copy its functionality, so I can also send Dash or Monero from one person to another. But what makes Bitcoin special, aside from just the branding of people learning about it before other cryptocurrencies, is the fact that it has such a high attack vector in terms of the complexity to be able to bring it down, that it is, for the most part, as close to something that is unattackable as you can get. And whereas with some other top 20, top 30 coins, you did have a 51% attack against Ethereum Classic not too long ago. You did have Bitcoin Cash, go in and sort of roll back a transaction. That's never happened in Bitcoin, other than some of the early experimental days when there were some mistakes they had to fix in the code. But since then, if somebody steals something, your only recourses are legal, not in the code. And that's a strength when we're talking about stable coins and governments getting behind coins and digital currencies. They can shut them down just like they can shut down a bank. You can't shut down Bitcoin. Okay, so asset creation. That was sort of the first use case other than payments, and that was Mastercoin. J.R. Willett, a programmer out of Seattle, Washington in the US, came up with this idea that he wanted to be able to build something that had more complex code that you can build things on top of, and to build it on top of Bitcoin for security. And that was called Mastercoin. So he wrote something in 2012 called the Second Bitcoin White Paper, and ended up creating the concept of the ICO. And BitAngels, we ended up as a group taking virtually, at least 90% of the $600,000 that was up for sale. And it was basically, you would put in 1 Bitcoin, which was worth $100 at the time, August of 2013, and you would get 100 Mastercoin. And so instead of the Genesis block that created Bitcoin, they called it the Exodus address. You would send your Bitcoin to the Exodus address, and you would get 100 Mastercoin in return. And that was it. It took a month to raise $600,000. The total market cap was $1 million. Within 4 months, despite a lot of warnings, it was like, don't get involved in this if you're not really deeply involved in cryptocurrency. This is, not for the faint of heart. I believe the exact words were something along the lines in the disclosures that cryptocurrency is an exceedingly risky investment. Building something on top of cryptocurrency is an insanely risky investment. Don't do it unless you know what you're doing. And great disclosures that made 200 times your money if you bought it in August and sold it in January or February of the next year. So obviously that was sort of the first ICO. They weren't even called ICOs at that point. Then came Ethereum. MaidSafe was the first multi-million-dollar ICO. That was a few months later. That sort of got a lot of the community involved. And we were fortunate to work with all three of these. So Vitalik had worked for a client of mine, Anthony DiOrio, at CryptoKit, which is a wallet company, sort of the progenitor of what's now Jax. And Anthony DiOrio in 2012 put an ad in the Toronto newspaper, said, I'm going to have a Bitcoin meetup. Anybody that's interested in Bitcoin, come to this address. And he was hoping that 100 people would show up. 6 showed up. Fortunately, one of those 6 was Vitalik. Any Vitaliks in the room? Introduce yourself afterwards. If you're going to create a $100 billion market cap from what your vision is at age 19. 19, of course, being the same age that Bill Gates started his company, Michael Dell started his company. It's a great age to be an entrepreneur. And so when Ethereum went out, it was still send Bitcoin to this address. The ERC20 token didn't come until a year and a half later. And that allowed for a lot simpler distribution where you're able to go in, create an ERC20 token, have an address on an Ethereum wallet, and say, okay, send it to here. Here's the official wallet. Augur was the first company to do that, and let me go back here. And that really started the whole boom. So ERC20 tokens in many cases are a placeholder. And then they develop a traditional blockchain on top of that. Otherwise, if they're simply acting as an economic system within an ecosystem of, I'm going to go and, empower people to, do wine or collectibles or, storage of power that's not involving actually having a full blockchain. ERC20 still has got thousands of functioning tokens, but it is not its own blockchain. It rides on top of Ethereum. And of course, it then slowed down when you had non-fungible tokens come around with ERC 721. The most prominent example of which was CryptoKitties. All of a sudden, people are like, why is it taking me like an hour and like double the fees or quadruple the fees to get my ERC20 transaction through? Oh, there's some damn CryptoKitties clogging up the system. And so just as Bitcoin has had its issues with scaling that for the moment seem to be fixed with SegWit, Ethereum is definitely in the midst of the struggle of when they move to proof of stake and will that be a secure. And it seems to be a perpetual 18 months from whenever the last time that Alex is asked. So we'll see what happens. But ERC 721 were not the first non-fungible tokens. Those would have been colored coins. So Bitcoin, in the early days, you could take a single Bitcoin divisible into 100 million Satoshi and mark one of those Satoshis and give it a different form of value. That's a non-fungible token. Even though it still will always have the value of a Satoshi, it can have value of something else, and there were a lot of experiments in the early days. ERC 721 seemed to be the current technology of choice for non-fungible tokens, and digital collectibles, digital gaming assets is a big market that's coming up. And so far, ERC 721 seems to have the lead in that, although EOS and a few other folks are certainly going after it. Stablecoins. We worked with the team at Tether, Brock Pierce, and it was actually built on Mastercoin. It was originally called RealCoin. And the idea was real simple. Have something that has stable value, and it's backed by money in a bank account, in this case, a Puerto Rico bank account, which is where I live. And when it got sold, it was then relaunched as Tether because they wanted to have other assets besides USD, have one for euros, have one for some other assets. But it would still be always backed by a bank account. Got sold to Bitfinex. There was some controversy, including recently with New York State, where they said, hey, we don't think you're really 100% backing. We're New York State. We're the cops to the world. We're going to go and seize money in Panama and make sure that it's not being diverted to buy or sell Bitcoin. Banks get to leverage their money 30, 40, 50 times to 1. So even if Tether had momentary, which they now kind of imply, momentary loans to themselves for cash flow purposes, nobody is holding Tether as a bank account. They're basically holding it as a stable currency for a few minutes at a time. And it's a 2% withdrawal fee. So you'd be an idiot to go and have that as your bank account. So I think a lot of the regulators don't understand what stablecoins, in the case of Tether at least, are about. There's going to be a huge explosion of stablecoins. Every country is going to have one denominated in their currency. There'll be a fight to see whether it's the banks that do it, whether it's governments with digital currencies, whether it's private companies that just simply buy treasury bonds and then make the money on the interest and have that on different exchanges. But you'll find a huge amount of stablecoins in the future, including ones that are backed by real estate or backed by gold. Tokenized securities are different than security tokens. So tokenized security is basically tokenizing something that's already a security. Real estate, art, really gold and silver, commodities. And in the case of real estate, it's still really early, and a lot of the hype, I think, is overrated because there's $4.5 trillion of REITs out there, and you're not going to be selling tokenized real estate to the same type of people that went into high risk, high return ICOs. You're going to be selling it to people who are looking for, what's my 4 or 5% that I'm going to get every year on a stable asset. And so it's a different type of investor, and right now real estate investors don't quite get tokens yet, and token investors think of real estate as a different class, and they typically just buy a traditional REIT or actual buildings. Security tokens are born on the blockchain, differentiating from tokenized securities. So BCAP, Blockchain Capital, also Brock Pierce, who was the co-inventor with Tether, basically was the first one to tokenize a limited partnership in a fund. I think that's one of the 2 or 3 uses today that actually makes sense for STOs, because a lot of jurisdictions, including the US and many jurisdictions in Europe, don't let you freely trade, and the primary stock exchanges don't let you on yet with a token. They still have their 3-day settlement. They still have the pieces of paper you have to get. They still have all their old world mechanisms. And so if you're a startup and you're thinking about doing an STO, don't. Just go and raise money with a normal private placement. There's no reason to complicate it unless you've got a royalty coming through. You've got a lot of cash flow coming in, and you're trying to automate the royalty without giving up early equity. A good example of that is an STO that I'm invested in, which is a group of Bitcoin ATMs, and they basically track the cash flows coming in, and you get a percentage of that from their cut before they get anything. So royalties and opportunity to get into a fund that you otherwise wouldn't get into seem to be the main reasons why you'd want an STO these days. In the future, I believe you're going to have great opportunities for example, say a restaurant chain where somebody likes the local food and they sell to their customers. And the customers get in early, they get a discount, they can show on their phone, and you have these hybrid tokens. That may take 3 to 5 years for the laws to catch up. The technology is already here. So ICOs versus IEOs. So first quarter of this year, we had $180 million of ICOs. And everybody said, ICOs are dead, they're dead. It was $3 billion last year. I'm sorry, 180 million was more than we had in 2013, 2014, 2015, and the first half of 2016 combined. If 180 million is a dead market, give me that dead market. IEOs are just ICOs using an exchange, and it's nothing new. A number of the early ICOs, including a number of the ones we did in 2015, 2016, were on exchanges. Bittrex, for example, had a number of ones. They did the IEO, they just didn't call it that, they called it an ICO, of ICO on an exchange, I think they were called back then, for eBoost and for triggers. And then Shapeshift actually did a couple of ICOs on their platform. They did BitCrystals and they did Voxels. And so then when ERC20 tokens came out, they're like, why do we need exchanges? They're going to charge us 0.5%. We'll just do it on our own. And now, one of the reasons people are looking at IEOs is because it, A, kind of guarantees that you get into distribution on that exchange, but the fees can be all over the place, from just ridiculous, like they keep all your money, to reasonable. Bittrex, I think, is 3 to 5%. It still seems high, but it's supply and demand. And I usually recommend that people only, if they're going to do an IEO at all, only do it at the tail end. You never want your first money to be an IEO. And our division, Transform Strategies, helps advise companies about the good, the bad, and the ugly on these. And you also still have equity of your company, which is a different bucket you can raise money from. So FATF, Financial, I forget what the A is now, Task Force. That's something the G20 is going to be looking at this month. And there's a lot of fear that they're going to basically recommend globally that all exchanges have to act like banks, and meaning that they'll make sure that if you're in an exchange, you can't just send them to a wallet unless the wallet has been identified as belonging to a person. That's going to change a lot. It'll basically force the decentralization of many new wallet-to-wallet exchanges. It'll basically take privacy out of Bitcoin, so we're going to see what happens. But right now, most of the countries are saying that they're going to go along with this. So again, more regulatory uncertainty, which hasn't killed cryptocurrency yet. If anything, it makes it stronger. The SEC has been in the U.S. and the CTFC have been having various forms of regulation. I think it'll only be resolved when Congress basically goes and says, hey, we shouldn't be looking at 1930s regulations anymore. We should be looking at cryptocurrency as being different than oranges. Hybrid tokens, I already had mentioned. I think that's a bit of the future where you have something that has aspects of a security and aspects of a commodity and a consumption token. Anything that has any part of a security is still regulated as a security, which is not a problem as long as you recognize it. A security actually is pretty good in the sense that in exchange for giving up a portion of your cash flows or a portion of your equity, you do get a tax advantage. Usually it's net operating loss, as opposed to you typically get taxed if it's a product, but you give up no equity. So you have to look at which one makes sense for your business model. And then after we sort through all these things, we're going to have bluebirds and happiness, and everything's going to go to the moon. Thank you. And these are my contact information. These are my only legitimate contact information. If you see somebody who claims to be me and doesn't have one of those, I get spoofed a lot. And I'll be around all day for questions, and I'll be on the next panel and one later. Thank you.